The next session is around financial decision making, and we have a wonderful group of panellists about to join us. And in particular, we will be starting off the session with a presentation from the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Mohammed Khalil, the General Manager of Digital Guidance for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And actually, as we will start with his presentation, I will be asking all of the panel members to join us on stage. And just to give a quick overview, Mo will actually be taking us through the CBA's journey in working with government, community and research groups to develop and test behavioural innovations to improve the financial well-being of customers and communities.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Thank you all for taking this time to learn a bit about the journey that we've been on over the past 18 to 24 months as my team, which I have the privilege of leading, looks at ways that we can help to improve the financial well-being of communities and customers. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is what is financial well-being. As we started to look at this challenge, what we tried to understand from the customer perspective are what are the problems that our consumers face today when trying to improve their day-to-day finances. And it came down to these three concepts of everyday, rainy day, and one day. Every day being the management of your daily expenses, your inflows and outflows, and the challenges that come with addressing the volatility, the timing, and the mismatches that occur. Similarly, when it came to rainy day and managing against shocks and unexpected events, how do we ensure that customers are getting the support that they need to predict, assess, and manage against those shocks? And then finally, when it came to one day, how do we help customers clearly articulate their goals, progress meaningfully against them, recover when they have challenges, and succeed in fulfilling them? And all of the issues related with intertemporal choice that happen throughout that entire process. So as my team started to look at this challenge of how do we solve these customer problems, we recognized that there was a need for a new approach. And that approach was focused on four key concepts. One was measurement. We need to be able to define financial well-being clearly and to be able to measure our progress and understand the factors that are important in the development of well-being. To me, this was the equivalent of developing a ruler, an instrument, an X-ray, a CAT scan that would allow us to dissect the challenges that our customers face and understand how we could change them. On the other side, you'll see that there's evidence. This is about treatments. How do we devise solutions that actually begin to address these challenges and prove that they are effective in helping customers enhance their well-being over time? Now, we also knew that we needed to bring the best of innovation, everything from our customer-centered design to our advanced machine learning and data science capabilities to the digital experiences that we deliver to millions of Australians every day. And then finally, collaboration. The ability to bring together all of those who have a role to play, to recognize that financial well-being and improving financial well-being is not something that we as an organization can do on our own. So this is our approach, and I think what you'll hear about over the next few minutes are some insights that we've had around what worked and what didn't work as we try to effect this. But two key principles that I want you to keep in mind is that we really wanted it to be evidence-based, and we went into this with a view that we did not want to be consumers of behavioral economics and academic expertise, but that we wanted to be producers. That our intent was to add to the dialogue, to bring new insights, to take some of the great work that has been done to date and help advance the field. The second was that we wanted to be customer-centric, that we wanted to apply an approach that ensured that we were respecting customer agency and doing what was in the best interest of our customers. So as we spend the next few minutes talking through this, There are a few questions that I think would be meaningful for us to address. What are the important indicators of well-being? How do we validate treatments and ensure meaningful impact? What collaboration is required to address these underlying factors? And where can our unique capabilities be leveraged to support progress? These are the types of challenges that I have the privilege of working with my colleagues here on the stage to try to address in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mo, for that introduction to our session. So what we're going to do now, we're going to give an opportunity for each of our panellists to give an introduction and I guess a bit of a backstory on what they've been working on in financial markets. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Michael Hiscox. Michael, what would you like to give the audience in terms of the work that you've been doing in this particular segment?
Very little, I guess, probably. No, I'd like to say a few things, but without giving away some of the work that we've been planning to do in collaboration with the Commonwealth Bank that is field experimental in nature. So I'm the director of the Harvard Star Lab. It's a group of behavioral economists and psychologists who work at Harvard with companies that are doing interesting things that we think are addressing fundamental social and environmental issues as part of their core business model. And so for, I think, about 2 years now, we've been working with the Commonwealth Bank in partnership with them, thinking about their new initiative to address customer financial well-being and the kinds of supportive research we could do jointly with them. And as Mo said, I think, the background to this is that there's an extensive body of research in behavioral economics and behavioral finance that makes it very clear to all of us that we as humans have a lot of trouble making financial decisions for a range of reasons that are sort of rooted in our human psychology. We have trouble figuring out what's the best choice for us. These choices between financial products often involve complex options or alternatives where there's a lot of uncertainty about events that will happen a long time in the future. It requires a lot of cognitive effort, it requires attention, and these things are hard for us to sustain. So often we look for shortcuts, and that can lead us to make bad choices. We have trouble with temptation as humans. So a lot of the things that involve good financial decisions require us to make costly decisions now because they'll pay off in the future. And that tends to be hard for humans. We are tempted, especially when we're excited and happy, to make choices that will be beneficial now but will be very costly in the future. And a lot of the work in behavioral finance is focused on how more ready access to consumer finance has removed a lot of the natural commitment mechanisms that were in place that made it harder for us. It basically gave us limits on our spending, for example, because we couldn't borrow immediately to finance immediate spending. And so those are gone now in a way. And so the problems associated with overspending are probably more difficult now than before. So thinking about these human problems, thinking about then the kinds of things that we could create either as part of a government initiative or because enlightened private institutions, financial institutions, are willing to try new things that we think will help customers make better decisions and produce better financial outcomes for them in the long term. I think that's an exciting area where we can apply behavioral insights, we can design rigorous field trials to test whether they work, and we can be very transparent about why we're doing this. We can improve customer well-being. That improves the relationship between the institution and the customer, and that's good for the business. It's also very good for the customers. So I think that's sort of a sweet spot for applied behavioral research, and that's where we're working.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. Professor Carol Camerton-Ford, we'd like to hear a bit about you and your work in this area.
Sure. So myself and a team from the Melbourne Institute fall into that measurement quadrant that Mo had up on his slides. Our task was to conceptualise, develop, test and implement a scale of financial wellbeing to quantitatively measure the financial wellbeing of CBA's customers and also the population in Australia at large. Clearly there's already lots of measures of financial wellbeing. We drew on the literature out there around that and came up with a way in which we could measure financial wellbeing using a combination of asking people questions about their financial wellbeing, but also looking at bank financial transaction data to get insights into people's financial wellbeing. And although we didn't anticipate it going into the project, what we found was he actually developed two different scales. One that reflects the self-reported perspective of people's financial well-being, and the other that captured the observed financial well-being based on the customer's activity with the bank. Through the process, we also collected a bunch of information about the characteristics of the customers, the economic conditions, attitudes, preferences, behaviours. And so now we were able to look at how those things relate to the financial wellbeing measure that we've developed and try to gain some insights into how wellbeing relates to those things. And through the work that Michael's doing, being able to understand how we can influence financial wellbeing. But now we have a good measure. It's a work in progress. There's still more work to be done. But it does give us a good tool to assess how effectively financial wellbeing is changing over time across different customers.
Thank you very much, Carol. That's fantastic work that's been done at the University of New South Wales. I'd also like to now ask Associate Professor Anuj Shah for your perspectives and work that you do.
Yeah, so I'm a cognitive psychologist by training, which means I try to understand how different situations affect, like what Michael was saying, the cognitive effort we put into situations, where we pay attention. And I guess most relevant today, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand how financial hardship affects cognitive processing, because it doesn't just impose financial constraints, right? It imposes cognitive constraints as well. And so when people are living on a limited budget, it necessarily requires a tremendous amount of focus, because any error you make, you don't have any financial slack or buffer to protect you from those errors. And so in some of our work, we've seen how that focus manifests. So for example, low-income consumers are actually in some situations quite good at spending their dollars efficiently, getting more bang for the buck, if you will. They also are very good at thinking about trade-offs. So they often have to ask the question of, well, if I buy this, what do I have to give up? And so there's a version of expertise that emerges from financial hardship. But of course, as we all know, it's impossible to give that level of focus or attention to every problem that comes your way. And so as financial hardship forces attention to shift to some problems, it necessarily means that other problems get neglected. And then that's where you see some of the counterproductive financial behaviors that you might associate with poverty or low-income consumers, like borrowing at too high an interest rate, for example. But it's important to note that those mistakes, if you want to call them mistakes, aren't because poor consumers have somehow disengaged from their financial lives or that they're myopic. It's that their attention just has to go elsewhere. And so when we think about designing solutions for low-income consumers, it doesn't require a tremendous amount of exotic psychology, but instead what we want to think about is, well, what are the solutions that we would use to design for anybody who's distracted, because they could apply here as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we're going to open up now to a panel discussion. And I wouldn't mind maybe just getting a bit of a start from yourself, Mo, which is from a CBA perspective, you've started on this journey. What have been some of the challenges along that way, and how have you dealt with those? And I'm thinking particularly where the partnerships might have also played a role.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges we had were looking at how we could experiment rigorously. So we have a number of experimentation capabilities. We have a lean and agile methodology that we use when we deliver many of our digital experiences. But the experimentation methodology that we were applying was not going to be at the level of rigor that would be necessary for publishing. And so part of the process that we had to go through, and it's quite painful, so it's not an easy thing, but it was very much worth the effort, was building the right capabilities to share data safely with our partners, being able to do experimental design in a far more sophisticated way, being able to hold out control groups and holdout groups effectively, and now getting to the point where we're able to do heterogeneous analysis so that we don't presume that a single treatment is the be-all and end-all, but actually looking for how does this treatment line up with a particular customer segment where it has an effect, and then how do we think about other customer segments where alternative treatments may be more appropriate. So that process took us a good year to get right, and it's still not perfect, and we're still working on it, but every opportunity that we have to improve on it allows us to accelerate the pace at which we're able to experiment, and we have dozens of experiments now lined up for us to better understand well-being.
Other panel members, would you like to sort of build on any of the comments there that Mo's talked about in terms of challenges and getting things into practice?
I mean, we've had a great experience. I think Mo is right. I think in some ways, like, this is a lesson for me working with a bunch of companies over years, is that we have a sense, at least I did going in, that companies are all over this. You know, applied behavioral insights to manipulate customers to get, you know, to cross-sell and upsell and maximize profits. And we know, but we tend, I think, to take our examples from what we hear about Google or Facebook or Amazon. And we say, wow, everyone has a huge data analytics team, a machine learning team, you know, A/B testing team, and they're constantly testing and optimizing all the messages that go out to us. And I think that's the extreme case, not the standard case. And I think, you know, Mo's team is amazing. The team at CBA is amazing, but you know, to reach the level of rigor that we needed for academic publication and the kinds of field experiments we wanted to design required a little bit more of a build and an investment, because we wanted to sort of cross all the T's and dot all the I's and make sure it was all ironclad. And so I think that's been a bit of a lesson, because it's been a joint effort to build up the capability at the same time as they're building up their team, and I think it's worked out very well.
And just to jump in on that, so I spend a lot of time doing lab studies, you know, involving people who are not out there in the world, but they're in the version of the world that we create. And the goal there is to come up with additional behavioral insights beyond the canonical 5 or 6 that we already have. But then a big challenge is, you know, once we have this thing from the lab, how confident are we in suggesting that now this is ready to be tested, not even scaled to intervention, but even tested, because once you start testing, it still has an effect on real people. And so there's a version of this evidence problem that John was talking about earlier that we also have to think about when we're recommending, okay, what's a new behavioral insight versus even that's worth even testing.
Carol, wouldn't mind asking you, what are the sort of the big opportunities in terms of, from a behavioural economics point of view, in really addressing the financial well-being of Australians?
So I might focus on the measurement issue, given I'm not a behavioural economist, but the focus is on measurement. And you might ask, you know, aren't there already lots of measures of financial well-being? Do we really need to have another measure? And I think the key things about the thing that we've been doing, where I think we add significant value, is firstly, we're thinking about financial well-being from an outcome point of view. So how do we measure the outcomes that people are experiencing? A lot of the measures in the past have sort of captured behaviours and attitudes rather than outcomes, and so I think that's an important contribution that we're making. The other is that a lot of the analysis of financial wellbeing in the past has been purely about people's self-reporting on their financial wellbeing. So the key benefit we've had is, by working with the CBA, being able to interrogate the financial record data of customers and look at their financial wellbeing outcomes based on observed activities. And one of the interesting things we've found is that the self-reported financial wellbeing is not the same as the observed financial wellbeing. And I think there's lots of things we can drill down into to try to understand that a little bit better. One interesting thing is about a third of the population reports that their self-reported financial wellbeing is high, but their observed is low, and vice versa. So we've got this sort of puzzle of why do people think they're doing well when they're not, versus they're not doing well but they think they are. And I think that's something that we'd like to explore some more.
Any other comments about just the general opportunities to apply behavioural economics in this context?
I mean, I think, you know, there are lots of opportunities. I mean, they're just everywhere, from helping consumers keep a better track of and understand the choices that they're making on a day-to-day basis, to helping solve some of the challenges that we all have in being able to predict infrequent and aperiodic expenses that occur throughout the year. I mean, everyone forgets about the rego payment or the school fees or that expense that you know happens, but it slips your mind until the last moment. Towards how many of us have have a savings goal in mind and yet have not progressed against that savings goal in any meaningful way. These are all very real challenges that our consumers and everyone in this room very likely faces. And each of those presents a really interesting opportunity because we're not talking about solving that problem en masse in a monolithic way, right? Everyone has a particular context, a particular set of circumstances, and a particular set of beliefs that they're operating under as they make those choices. And the power of the measurement work that we're doing is it is that X-ray that allows us to get some basic understanding of that context, those circumstances, and those beliefs, so that as we look at designing interventions, we can try to tailor them to those particular scenarios. Now, there are some things that we need to keep in mind. One is that we should not confuse the tool that we're using to measure well-being with well-being. Because what will happen is that you will begin to work towards the metric. And just because we've been able to find a very rigorous and scientific way of evaluating well-being using methods that are allowing us to abstract it and evaluate it, that does not mean that those abstractions are the full range of what well-being is. And that is something that we try to keep in mind, that we're not trying to work against the measure. The measure is really a way for us to evaluate our progress. And then when it comes to the treatment, going back to this heterogeneous concept, recognizing that no one's going to go build an experience and say, I've solved savings. That's just not going to happen, right? People behave in different ways. People have different biases. People will respond to different kinds of treatments. And that's a very different mindset, particularly for a commercial organization, when typically the answer is you have problem X and you build solution Y and you're done. Instead, it's you have problem X, we need to build a toolkit. That toolkit needs to be able to address the following circumstances, contexts, and beliefs for our customer set. And then we need to get really good at being able to match the customer problem, that customer context, with the right treatment. And so there's a lot of opportunity. I think we have barely scratched the surface. And as exciting as the work is, it's many years, if not decades of work.
An area I wouldn't mind actually asking all of you on is if we just zoom in on a type of client base that might be similar in a government context as well, which are the vulnerable communities or people who face significant barriers. So I'm interested in terms of working with that particular cohort in the community, how have you gone about doing it and what have been some of the challenges and opportunities?
So I'll jump in. So one thing that we spend, because I'm a cognitive psychologist, time thinking about is, well, okay, so how is mental bandwidth and capacity going to fluctuate over time? Because just as for somebody facing financial hardship, somebody living in poverty, that situation itself fluctuates. There are moments of slack and then harder times as well. And along with that, bandwidth tends to fluctuate. And so that suggests there might be times that are more opportune for asking somebody to make an important decision when things are not so tough at home, when they have a bit more bandwidth. And so you can try and anticipate that or wait for that, but at least in some contexts, you might even be able to create that situation for them. So I'll give you an example from something very, very far away, and then we can brainstorm about how that would apply here. So we've done some work with Give Directly, which is an organization in Western Kenya that gives cash directly to the rural poor. And they give about equal to about $1,000 US over the course of a year or so. And so in our study, we wanted to understand, okay, are there times, what happens if we would give people choice over when they receive that money and how they receive that money? And is there a better time to ask versus a worse time to ask? And so there what we did was we gave people a small amount of cash, and then we either asked them when that cash was still on hand in the household, or once they had spent down that cash. Okay, so everybody still received that cash, but for some people it's still there, for others it's not. And what we found is that when people still had that cash on hand, they made very different decisions about how to then receive that those $1,000 worth of disbursements. They were more patient. So they were willing to wait about 2 weeks longer. And that might not sound like a lot, but you can think about how expensive it would be to get a loan to accelerate that payment by 2 weeks. And that gives them time to plan as well what to do with this very large sum of money that's coming in. And that's not changing how much overall money they have in their household, but it's paying attention to how the bandwidth in the household might fluctuate and give them what the resources they need to make a better decision or a different decision at least.
And we are testing very similar concepts. Unfortunately, we can't speak directly to them to sort of protect the publication IP, but over the next year, I think you'll see the work that we're doing, but very much along the same lines, looking at how do we help reduce the cognitive load on customers, particularly those who are in a state of difficulty or hardship. How do we connect them with the right support services and other things that might be available to them? But over time, I think you'll see sort of us applying a lot of the same principles, particularly to customers who are very challenged with their financial well-being, both in the short and long term.
And I think, like, coming from the work I was doing at Beta and also doing those work with CBA, some of the comparisons are really interesting. I think, you know, we were thinking about citizens who are getting welfare payments and the amount of communications they get from different parts of the government in terms of cognitive load. And so this, you know, the stream of information that's sort of being directed at people, and they're supposed to respond to it all and take it all in and make good choices based upon this all. And sort of thinking in a similar context that, you know, we don't want to overload customers who we think we might be able to help with different kinds of initiatives or new products or services with a whole range of things. And then part of that communication problem too is just the trust issue. So on the government side, there's a sense that, you know, the government is sending me stuff or asking me to do things because it wants to monitor me more, monitor my behavior more, and you know, catch me out if I'm non-compliant with whatever it is. And on the bank side, it's more like the bank is sending me stuff because it wants to sell stuff. And so there's a sort of this trust hurdle that has to be overcome in each case. And in a context in which people are getting, you know, massive amount of communications from both kinds of organizations, it's very hard to cut through that.
I actually was interested in asking a question about the concept of ethics in the work that you do. How do you deal with that topic in terms of the designing of interventions and your experiments, and depending on the cohort that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, we as academics, we have a very rigorous ethical review process for every kind of research we do. So every trial we run in collaboration with the bank, we run through an institutional review board at Harvard to have it overseen. This is, you know, I worked for many years in developing country interventions, and it's a very similar issue where we can talk about the kinds of outcomes that we're trying to achieve, why we need to test to make sure that there are not unintended consequences that may mean that the intervention in fact doesn't work well. So we need a control group, we need a rigorous design, why we think the benefits are worthwhile, and how we've mitigated the risks associated with the trial. In most of the trials that we're talking about here, we're talking about a new product or a service or a piece of information. So the risk in terms of the taking a piece of somebody's attention for a short period of time is very, very small. So the ethical challenges have not been great, I think, from my side.
Carol.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Michael said. There's in the universities, there's a very strong ethics process, and you go through a process that ensures that everything's robust and rigorous. I guess in our instance, it's about ensuring that you're separating the process of the analysis from anything that the bank might do with the customers. There's no connection between, we've looked at this set of customers, the bank has no reference to the fact that they're the set of customers in that study. And I think that separation is very important.
The understanding from a CBA perspective, there's a fair bit of collaboration occurring between yourself and government, academics. Can you take us through any examples in that where it's working really well, or any examples where there are some challenges?
Sure. We'll have to speak a bit vaguely just because, again, some of the work is sort of experiments in flight. But about a year and a half ago, we established a roundtable where we invited select government agencies, nonprofit, customer advocates, and researchers to participate in a discussion around financial well-being. And through that process, we wanted to sort of understand whether our understanding of financial well-being and the challenges was correct. And it was a great opportunity for us to listen, to hear from the community, to hear from government as to what they saw as being the key challenges. That helped us focus in on a few key areas, primarily customers in financial difficulty, those who are dealing with financial abuse and domestic violence, and those who are engaging in risky behaviors like problem gambling, emerged as this 3 key areas that we wanted to collaborate together on. And over that year and a half, what we've done is convene regularly, run workshops collaboratively to drill into some of these challenges, design some of these experiments, and then begin executing and monitoring the results.
Just a quick follow question to that. Why don't more organisations take that approach?
I can't answer for other organizations. Maybe you can speak to some of the engagements that you've had with other organizations and why there are some barriers there.
Sure, yeah, I can talk about epic failures in my past and taking collaboration. I think there's this came up earlier in the earlier session. I didn't see all of it, but there's there's a threat associated with rigorous research and evidence. If somebody, particularly with a leadership role in an organization, whether it's a government organization or a private organization, has decided that something works, has created a program or a product that they think works, and now we're going to test that, or we're going to at least examine evidence that would indicate whether it's working well or not so well. So I think, John talked about this, sort of what we need is a cultural change in terms of how we think about policy or product design, especially products that are aimed at, social and environmental outcomes, is that we need to think about how we build evidence as we design the product, do initial tests with the product and scale it up, so that it's non-threatening in the sense of, leaders won't be fired if we discover that something doesn't work. But there's a whole range of, I think, interesting, psychological issues associated with the hierarchy in large organizations that, you don't get to be a leader by sort of saying, I'm not sure what the answer is, let's test. Right? You get to be a leader by walking in and saying, I know how to fix this problem, trust me, here's what we do. And so it's you need this move towards what we call a learning organization, where there's a culture of testing and always criticizing, and in fact you have a process and an institutional platform for continuous testing.
So I think there's a tension that John described very well earlier, and David as well, on the two sides. Academics want to publish, and there's hurdles that we have to meet in order to do that. Industry want outcomes that are commercially attractive, and so there's not always a perfect overlap in terms of achieving those two ends, because academics want independence and be able to achieve whatever result is the result, whereas sometimes industry wants a particular result. But I think we need to work together a lot more to find opportunities where there is a really good overlap in terms of there's not an end in mind, it's sort of finding a solution to a problem. And I think Michael's point about acknowledging we don't know the answer and we need to find the answer is sometimes challenging, but I think there needs to be more of that.
Having said that, I should say, it's easy from the cheap seats, right? Yeah. It's like, come on, just admit you don't know and let's do more testing. But, I'm not the one sitting in the hot seat there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And testing's expensive as well. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that, there's definitely a cost associated with this. But I think being a purpose-driven organization that has clearly stated that improving financial well-being of customers and communities is our focus. This is probably the most valuable thing we can do for our customers, is to really get an understanding of what does that purpose mean and how are we going to manifest it effectively.
And just from my own experience, I don't know how much this generalizes, but I think sometimes people fall in love with a particular program or initiative, and they lose sight of the fact that, there's an outcome that we all care about in moving, and if you get them bought back into moving that outcome, then they might be more willing to give up on that program that they thought was so valuable. They thought it was valuable because, of course, it was going to impact the outcome they cared about, so refocusing them on that.
Now I'm going to ask each of you the same question to answer, and then I'm going to open up to the floor for questions. I want to know what excites you. Why, of all the things that you've picked, you're working now in, you're in the CBA, but working in financial markets, applying to understand behaviours and what we can do to help achieve certain outcomes. So to help the audience understand what really excites you, what is something you're working on in a practical sense that you're super excited about, that you feel this is part of your contribution to this space? Anuj, would you like to start?
Sure. So one thing that excites me is that starting out as a cognitive psychologist, you spend a lot of time researching why people click certain buttons and focus on little dots on the screen. And so now having the chance to speak about something in the world is just exciting. People pay attention. My parents understand why I did what I did. So that itself is exciting, but also just trying to understand how you can have a common lens for understanding how a variety of different social situations are impacting people. And I think that kind of demystifies some of the things that initially seem more exotic. You say, no, there's actually a common psychology going on throughout this.
Okay, thank you. Carol.
I think the thing that excites me is that there's still so much that we don't know. We've made good progress in terms of measuring financial well-being, but we've got a long way to go. And I think it's a really important issue where we can have a big impact. So doing more and sort of slowly peeling back the issues and coming to better answers is really important.
Michael.
Yeah, I think it's, without, again, talking about some of the specific projects, but just the idea that, we've witnessed this huge change technologically in terms of our access to data, what we can do with data, and what we can do, especially in the digital sphere, with experimentation to figure out what kinds of communications, what kinds of digital products can actually help people get to better outcomes. And we're just at the cusp of sort of thinking about how that can apply to improve government services and access to government programs that are designed to help people, but people are not accessing, or they're not accessing and using well. And the same with things that private institutions might try to help people and help their own customers, is that there's a whole range of amazing things that could be done. And so far, Amazon and Facebook and Google have used those things for other purposes. We can kind of wheel that around now and use that within government and in parts of the private sector to do really good things for people who are really disadvantaged. And so the potential power of that is really exciting.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael.
I think for me, it's the fact that there's a lot to learn, and we're building a technology. Because this ability, the way I think about it is that whether it's behavioral economics or understanding financial well-being, or how you practically apply that understanding and behavioral economics, to me, we're sort of in a Galilean era. And we've yet to sort of emerge into a Newtonian era where we've started to really begin to pull these pieces together, have the right tools and instruments to affect huge amounts of change. And I think to be part of that process of at least building some of the tools, whether it's the telescope and the microscope and some of the treatments that we think will be effective, I think will contribute tremendously to helping to advance our understanding of both human behavior, financial behavior, and what we mean when we say that someone is in a state of good financial health.
Thank you very much for that conversation. So I'd like to open it up to the audience now for some questions. We have an immediate one here, then we'll follow with this lady here. So just at the front.
David Tunnicliffe from Grey Matters. Question for Anuj. I was interested in what you were saying about trade-offs in terms of, or trade-off competency, and how that varied by bandwidth, was influenced, and particularly amongst lower socioeconomic groups. I wondered to what extent trade-off competency varied by the concreteness of the issue that was people were dealing with, and if, as I would suspect, the more abstract the issue, such as an interest rate, compared to a hard choice, whether the task clearly indicated the path to resolution was to find a way to make the abstract more concrete.
So actually, let's talk about interest rates directly. So my colleague Marianne Bertrand at Chicago Boots has done some work where she tried to understand, okay, what are the factors that would actually help better communicate how much a loan costs, for example. And why is it that people take payday loans, which can have such high interest rates? And so she said, well, maybe there's a couple of different ways that we can communicate the cost of these loans. So one is, let's say this loan costs 10% each week. Okay, what does that mean? Then she says, all right, let's talk about that as it's being roughly about 500% per year. Now that's a big number. Maybe that'll discourage people from taking up the loans. That didn't have such a big effect. So then she says, all right, what if we communicate how much this loan costs more concretely in terms of the number of dollars that this loan will cost you? This will cost a couple $100 if you take this loan. Now she sees that people are dropping a bit. They're not taking the loan up at such a high rate. And why? Because, well, how do I think about what 500% is? What's the trade-off when I take 500%? I don't know. It's a big number, but I don't know what percent means. Not really. But if you tell me about it in terms of dollars, well, now I can say if I take this loan, it means I can't afford this thing or that thing. So I think the concreteness of the problem that's in front of you really does matter a lot for thinking about trade-offs. Abstractly, it's still hard to do. I think it needs to be specifically about there's this choice or this choice, and not just something in the future versus now. I think that's a hard trade-off to think about.
Great, thank you. We just have another question at the floor here.
Hi, my name is Elif and I'm from IAG. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panel members. As a practitioner, I think it's great to see the effort and the rigor that goes into designing and implementing these processes. As a consumer though, are you able to share some insights on how all of these initiatives manifest at the customer level in terms of what outcomes will be available?
Yes, yeah, so most of our efforts at the moment are sort of in a trial phase with customers. As I said, we always respect customer choice. So customers, as much as possible, we give them opportunities to choose how they want to engage with these sets of services. Some of the things that you would see emerge over the next few months and years would be tools that allow you to sort of get better at keeping track of your finances, making choices, clarifying those trade-offs, ensuring that when there are instances where the typical person would overlook or forget a particular cost or expense that they need to be managing. And we're trying to create those types of tools in a way that would be engaging to the customer. So, one of the things that we're thinking about, for example, is, no customer today walks into any bank and says, I'm having trouble opening up a savings account. That's not the problem, right? People walk in saying, I have a problem with savings. I really want to do X, Y, or Z, and I just haven't been able to make any progress. How do we help customers solve that problem? And so those are the types of experience you'd begin to see where we would offer you an opportunity to say, hey, would you like to try a new way of managing your goals? Or tracking your daily expenses and being able to ensure that you don't overspend at a certain point in the month. And these tools will have been rigorously tested and validated to ensure that they have the best chance of succeeding. But again, we don't expect every tool to be 100% effective with every customer.
Any other comments?
I mean, the flavor of these things, we're not talking about current trials that we're working on, but the flavor of these things is very much like reminders, alerts and notifications. Would you like help with the selection of a credit card? Like, that's a really hard thing to do. What's the appropriate credit card, right? And lots of companies, not to name any, but Bank of America, will give you a whole list of things, right? And they'll try and steer you very directly towards high interest rewards cards, right? With one of my favorite graphics from them that I got in email from them has, you have little pictures of, are you a globetrotter? Here's the rewards card for you. Are you the savvy shopper? Here's the rewards cards for you. Are you the sports fan? Here's the rewards card. Are you the financially responsible? And the little picture is a guy with glasses and braces that, right? But that's the low interest card that probably everyone should have, right? So that, can we provide a more responsible, transparent way of showing people what the choices are, what's a good choice that will be focused on their financial well-being? I mean, those are really interesting things, I think, that are very customer-centric, that are applications of behavioral insights that we can rigorously test to see whether it helps people make better choices that they're happier with. So it aligns their intentions with their actions.
Great, thank you. Some other questions on the floor. Back there.
Hi, yeah, it's Anna Aquilina. I'm with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the cybersecurity team. And thank you for the really interesting session. It's slightly tangential, perhaps, to what we've been talking about directly, but I am wondering, particularly perhaps on the cognitive side, if you've done any work around why people will still click on so many emails they should not click on. Everything we do in cybersecurity is failing abysmally trying to get people to be a bit more aware online. And I think, nudge could be a good way to approach this. But have you done anything or seen anything that works?
Specifically on your inbox, or? I think there's a lot of work on the kinds of things that just sort of naturally capture attention, right? And there's nothing surprising here, right? Big neon signs capture attention. There's versions of those neon signs as well. Every time your inbox has something, puts up a little one, there's a new email. That's an easy thing to pay attention to, perhaps because it's a concrete thing that you can deal with, whereas there's other abstract things that aren't necessarily clear how you make progress on it. But I have not done any direct research on that, and so it'd be hard for me to speak directly to that. Yeah.
So we're about, coincidentally, we're about to do a trial at Harvard that I helped design, which is on exactly this topic. And so there's a range of behavioral messages that are going to go out to staff that, try to emphasize loss aversion, what you could lose if you click on one of these emails, or shared responsibility, what could happen to the university or your colleagues if you click on one of these emails. We don't know what's going to work or if anything will work. But they have, we did run a version of this where we sent out the fake email ourselves and then looked, and almost everyone clicked on it. So I think we can improve. There's a lot of room for improvement there. And the faculty clicked on it just as much as the staff. So I don't know what that tells you. But.
Any other comments? Okay, we have another question from the floor.
Hi, Sam Wakeling from ASIC's Financial Capability Team. Carol, my question's for you. You gave us a really nice little insight from your study into observe a self-reported behaviour, and it's simply, what else can you tell us?
That's a good question. So there is some work going on at the moment looking at descriptive characteristics of customers and how that influences financial well-being, but I'll leave that till later for reporting. But some of the things that were really interesting were income correlates with financial well-being, but not perfectly. So there were high-income earners that had poor financial well-being and vice versa. Housing correlates with financial well-being. So people who are homeowners are more likely to have stronger financial well-being than renters. So things that were not surprising, but sort of give us a good sense that what we're capturing is the right thing. And more work's required to sort of explore some of those associations. And we have a long technical report that gives you lots of those insights into how different variables relate to that financial well-being.
And we're collaborating on publishing that shortly, so I think you'll have your answer very, very soon.
Next question.
Sorry, it's actually related to that, Carol. So with Susan Wheeler, Department of Human Services, so if I understand you, some people underestimate their financial well-being and some overestimate. Did you ever look at the anchors that they might be using to determine their financial well-being? So I'm just wondering whether people compare upwards if they're at a certain level and they don't think about how much better off they are than people worse off than them. So they might not feel like they've got financial well-being because they're always looking up instead of being sort of, grateful for where they are. So did you look at anchors, or did you give them a definition of financial well-being before you asked them to answer questions? And then how did you define objective financial well-being?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We didn't give people specific anchors, and we weren't asking people to define financial well-being. I do have a slide somewhere that gives the final list of what were the questions that effectively captured financial well-being outcomes, and then also our observed measures. If it's possible to get that up, that would be great. So we tested a whole range of questions that we asked people about their well-being outcomes, and then explored a whole range of customer record measures as well. These were the ones that, using the item response theory approach that we took to this analysis, showed up as being important. But I think you asked a good question about what people's reference point was, and some of the descriptive work that's coming soon should give us some insights into that in terms of what people's benchmarks are for how they assess their own well-being.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question? Oh, just here we have one. Thank you.
Christian Rotaro, Monash University. Quick question to Mo. whether and how machine learning algorithms are used to understand and improve financial well-being at Commonwealth Bank.
Sure. So, there's lots of uses for data science and machine learning. Everything from you need to cleanse the data to be able to actually interpret it, right? So if we're going to try to understand what you're spending and where you're spending it, we need to be able to actually analyze that data. The second is when we are, preparing our experimental design and looking to create test and control groups, also using the machine learning and data science to ensure that we're setting up the right structure, following the characteristics that we're going to be tracking when we actually implement a treatment. We're using machine learning and data science there to help us do the heterogeneous analysis so that we can see overall what was the effect size, but then also at a much more granular level, what are the segments of populations where it's been effective, as well as when we come to some of the experimental designs that we've done, we try to maximize the different sort of treatments that we can do without necessarily having to run all the treatments. So, there are certainly ways where you can design experiments such that, if you're testing variable A here and variable B there, you can look at whether on an additive basis they would have any additional incremental effect. So, we're looking at applying data science in a variety of different ways throughout sort of the value chain of the process, whether it's sort of preparing the information that's required, designing the experiment, evaluating the results, and then making sure that we have a very nuanced understanding of how those results may manifest themselves with different customer populations.
Thank you. Another question.
Hi, I'm Emily from Fordham University. My question is for Carol. Two questions. One is that I was very struck by this distance between people's perceived well-being and people's actual well-being, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about how this maybe differs across SES, the kinds of financial products that you find that they have. And the second question is the policy implications of people who maybe are objectively in a very bad spot. They're in really a lot of debt and payday loans and things like that, but they perceive their well-being as being very high. And so what are the policy implications for dealing with a sort of a population that, doesn't think they need help, for example? Yeah.
So the answer to the first question has to wait until the new study is out. The second question, I think, it clearly is the group to me that's most concerning is the group that perceives that they have good financial well-being, but they don't. And it's not clear to me how to tackle that problem yet. But the measures we have of people's observed well-being are quite effectively capturing people who are at the weak end of the well-being scale. So one of the measures was, are you using a payday loan? Another was, is your cash balance at the end of the month less than 1 week of expenses? So things that indicate pretty poor financial well-being. So those people in that category, I think, is the area where we need to focus on, but we don't yet have answers to those questions, I'm sorry.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yeah, just the front.
Hi, Sam Haynes from the Behavioural Insights team. I have a question, a bit of a follow-up to some of the previous ones, about disentangling people's financial behaviours and their income level when thinking about their financial well-being. And to give an example, imagine you had a low-income person who budgets, they manage their money well, they never get into debt, but they have no savings and no pension because they don't have any money. And you have another person who has a good income, is a mid-career professional, but they have the wrong credit card, they pay fees on it every month, they spend on frivolous things and don't manage their money well at all. Who has the better financial well-being, and who is it more important to help, actually?
So I guess I can start, and I'm sure Mo has an answer as well. I mean, I think the people in financial distress are the most important people to help. But curiously, the people who have high income but are making bad decisions are the easier people to help. And I think some of the tools and nudges that the bank can implement can more easily help those people. But it's about finding the balance, I guess, in terms of what resources have you got and allocating to those that are most in need.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, financial well-being is, you can have bad financial well-being at any state on the income scale. The challenge is that the lower, it's not necessarily about the income, it's more about your ratio of commitments to your income. And the higher that ratio is, the less room there is for error. And so certainly those who are at the lower end, because there is less room for error, we want to pay close attention to them and ensure that they're getting the support and experiences that they need. That said, what we're finding is that oftentimes many of the tools that you would design for that type of scenario are applicable regardless of income level. So it doesn't actually end up being a choice in terms of whether we can support low or high income. It's more around looking at a view that says, are we helping individuals who have no slack? And how do we help them create slack? In instances where they have high income, it's a lot easier to solve that problem. In instances where there is low income, we actually might have to deploy a set of tools rather than a single tool to really make some headway for them.
Okay. All right, we're going to have to leave all the questions there. Can we please give a round of applause to our panel for an excellent conversation? I do think the conversation, the questions were just absolutely fantastic. So thanks for drilling in and really asking very pertinent questions. Just a couple of comments I want to make. I think the concept around the trust hurdle was very interesting, Michael, in terms of where we all sit in the community and context in which we want to achieve certain outcomes. The emphasis about being responsible and transparent is really important, particularly about whose outcome are you shooting for, and that tension between both organisational outcome and ultimately about the customer or the citizen. And I really like that last part of the conversation about where do you pay attention, where do you get the best gain, but for whom, and really being quite clever about the multiplicity that you take towards actually thinking about their experimentation, but also what you're trying to learn from that process, both from an outside-in perspective, from a customer or client, as well as yourselves as organisations. So thank you again, absolutely brilliant, really appreciate your time and coming here for this panel.